Hey there, friends. David Lightbringer here with another video to get you hyped for the newest Game of Thrones show, Night of the Seven Kingdoms. A little stubby candle theater, and it is, in fact, time to talk about Rebellion. The Blackfyre Rebellion. I suppose I should have made a video this week called Everything You Need to Know Before Watching Night of the Seven Kingdoms, but that would have just been the story of the Blackfyre Rebellion anyway, and so here we are. To wit, I noticed something while doing my recent Baylor Breakspear video, thanks for watching everyone, which is that Robert's Rebellion takes place 17 years before Game of Thrones, and the Blackfyre Rebellion takes place 15 years before the Hedge Knight. From this, we can conclude that the good thing to do when writing your own fictional story is to put a war about a decade and a half before the main story. That way your main characters have battle scars, old grudges, lost loved ones to mourn, and cool nicknames they won through feats of valor. Most of all, you get the roads not taken, but for this or that little fluky thing that could have gone one way but went the other instead. Just ask Sir Eustace Osgrey, Blackfyre Rebellion loser. Sir Eustace cradled his wine cup in both hands.
If Daemon had ridden over Gwaine Corbray, if Fireball had not been slain on the eve of battle, if Hightower and Tarbeck and Oakhart and Butterwell had lent us their full strength, instead of trying to keep 1 foot in each camp, if Manfred Lothston had proved true instead of treacherous, if storms had not delayed Lord Bracken's sailing with the Mirish crossbowmen, if Quickfinger had not been caught with the stolen dragon's eggs. So many ifs, sir. Had any one come out differently, it could have all turned the other way. Then we would be called the Loyalists, and the Red Dragons would be remembered as men who fought to keep the usurper Darren the Falseborn upon his stolen throne, and failed.
"That's as it may be, my lord," said Dunk, "but things went the way they went." Tough breaks, but interestingly, you can do the same routine for Robert's Rebellion.
If the armies of Lord Caffrin, Grandison, and Fell had arrived at Summerhall's ruins at the same time to join their forces against Robert, instead of arriving one at a time and being picked off in turn. If Stannis had run out of shoe leather to eat at Storm's End just a few days earlier. If Lord Borrell had clapped the rebel lord Eddard Stark in irons and shipped him to King Aerys, instead of putting him on a boat to White Harbor.
That's right, if that shoe leather had just run out sooner, everything could have been different. So I hope you were imagining me there as some bitter old friend of Rhaegar's, mourning how he could have been the better king. Oh, I'm describing John Connington, exactly. 17 years had come and gone since the Battle of the Bells, yet the sound of bells ringing still tied a knot in his guts. Others might claim that the realm was lost when Prince Rhaegar fell to Robert's warhammer on the Trident. But the Battle of the Trident would never have been fought if the Griffin had only slain the stag there in Stony Sept.
The bells tolled for all of us that day.
For Aerys and his queen, for Elia of Dorne and her little daughter, for every true man and honest woman in the Seven Kingdoms,
and for my Silver Prince.
So, as you can see, Robert's Rebellion and the Blackfyre Rebellion really do frame Game of Thrones and the Hedge Knight in very similar ways. And don't worry if you couldn't follow everything Sir Eustace was saying as he stared forlornly into the depths of his wine cup. We're going to break down everything he said and much more by the end of this video. Sir Eustace has a lot to say about the Blackfyre Rebellion since he was there, and also since he left 3 dead sons on the battlefield. And on top of that, Sir Eustace's wife, of course, ended her own life by jumping from the tower after the war because Sir Eustace, as part of his losers' negotiation, had to give up their only daughter as a hostage ward of the crown. Definitely left a mark on Sir Eustace. And then we have the redoubtable Sir Arlen of Pennytree, who of course found Dunk in Flea Bottom, took him on as his squire, and basically raised Dunk. He was at Redgrass Field too, which is something Dunk mentions when Sir Eustace brings up the Blackfyre Rebellion.
Many good men fell that day, on both sides. The grass was not red before the battle. Did your Sir Arlen tell you that?
Sir Arlen never liked to speak about the battle. His squire died there too. Roger of Pennytree was his name, Sir Arlen's sister's son. Even saying the name made Dunk feel vaguely guilty. I stole his place. Only princes and great lords had the means to keep 2 squires. If Aegon the Unworthy had given his sword to his heir Daemon instead of his bastard Daemon, there might never have been a Blackfyre Rebellion, and Roger of Pennytree might be alive today. He would be a knight someplace, a truer knight than me. I would have ended on the gallows, or been sent off to the Night's Watch to walk the wall until I died. Ergo, the Blackfyre Rebellion story is not just a story about the Targaryen dynasty and which branch of the family tree was legitimate. This is a war that left a mark everywhere, all through the Seven Kingdoms, even with people who were not there, like Dunk. That means we should imagine hundreds, if not thousands, of sad, gut-wrenching stories spread all throughout the kingdom. Stories like that of Sir Arlen's family or Sir Eustace's family. That's why Dunk and Egg are frequently encountering the fallout of the Blackfyre Rebellion as they wander the Seven Kingdoms. And that's only until the Blackfyre Rebellion sequels start dropping and have to be dealt with directly. On top of all that, the Blackfyre Rebellion, of course, very much did shape the future destiny of House Targaryen and many of the other great houses of the kingdom besides. The rebellion itself was born out of classic Game of Thrones court politics. And honestly, I think this is the most interesting period of Targaryen history that George has written, even more than the Dance of the Dragons or the rivalry between Aenys and Maegor. And we did get into this history a little bit in the Baelor Breakspear video last week, but today we're going to tell the whole story of the Blackfyre Rebellion, as would have been understood by the citizens of the realm, and more importantly the people at Ashford Meadow on the day that the Hedge Knight and Knight of the Seven Kingdoms show begins. Oh, I wonder who could that be? I didn't give anyone my address here.
It's me, Dave. Let me in. It's bloody cold out here.
Oh, hey Rhaegar, how did you find me all the way up here?
Well, you left the Google Maps location search open in a browser tab.
I see.
Well, this is a nice cabin, Dave. Did you build this yourself?
Well, yes, I sure did. You know, I was feeling like I needed a little more privacy to get some work done.
Oh, well, excuse me. I was actually bringing you your Manta sleep mask because I knew you needed it to do the ad, but I guess I'll just go back home.
Rhaegar, I'm sorry. Come back. Maybe I was too hasty. I mean, that is very thoughtful of you. In fact, how would you like to do that?
Oh, I thought I was too emotionally volatile to do your ad reads.
No, come on in. Come on, I trust you. And besides, you've been a little more mellow lately.
Well, that's because I got a Manta sleep mask, and better sleep equals better emotional regulation. Now, let me just adjust the lighting real quick.
Hey, how did you do that?
It's Hollywood magic, Dave. Don't question it. As most of you will know, I've been crashing on David Lightbringer's couch for a few years now, which makes us roommates and best friends. And the sponsor of today's video, Manta Sleep, has changed both of our lives for the better. You see, friends, staying up all night and making YouTube videos is hard work, and so is staying up all night and eating all of Dave's snacks and watching him make YouTube videos. So both of us tend to take naps during the day. And friends, let me tell you, if you're trying to take naps during the day when that mean old sun is out, without a sleep mask, you're not getting a real nap. Manta sleep masks, like the one I'm wearing here, block out 100% of all ambient light photons. And when you give your brain 100% blackout, it actually shuts down so you can actually get restorative rest. The fully adjustable and fully comfy eye cups put zero pressure on your eyes, even if you have beautiful long lashes like myself. And they're designed with side sleepers in mind. All of Manta Sleep's sleep masks are lightweight and breathable, and with a variety of materials and designs available on the website, you're sure to find one that suits your needs. Manta Sleep has thought about sound, too. One of their masks has ultra-thin Bluetooth headphones built in, and they also have this very cool white noise machine, which creates a sound shield to block noise before it even reaches you. No phone app or phone syncing necessary either. Just one button press, and you're instantly surrounded by one of 15 custom-engineered continuous soundscapes. So, friends, if any of that sounds good to you, simply click the Manta Sleep link in the description below and use promo code DAVID for 10% off. A huge thanks to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. And now, Dave, let's talk about the fact that you're about to make a Daemon Blackfyre video without me.
It's actually more about the entire rebellion, not just...
Because I'm a huge fan, you know.
Oh, well, that figures.
Daemon Blackfyre was the warrior himself. Did you know that, Dave?
Oh, please. You're just repeating what Sir Eustace said.
Now who's the emotionally volatile one?
All right, the first bit of history we got to get into on this is actually the Dornish history, because there are essentially two major causes of the Blackfyre Rebellion, one being the tension surrounding the Dornish integration into the Seven Kingdoms, and, of course, Aegon the Unworthy, just everything that he did, it's a lot. Both the Dornish situation and Aegon the Unworthy's proclivity for siring royal bastards created disaffected rival factions at court and throughout the kingdom, which eventually rallied around Daemon Blackfyre as their candidate to the throne to challenge the legitimacy of King Daemon the Good, Daemon II Targaryen, who is still the king when the events of Hedge Knight / Knight of the Seven Kingdoms unfold. I know, how could anyone rebel against someone called Daemon the Good? Well, we're going to explain that. So first we'll tackle the Dornish history and their gradual integration into the Seven Kingdoms. Then we'll talk about the mess that Aegon the Unworthy created. Then we'll get into the Blackfyre Rebellion itself, both how it started and how it went down. And chiefly that involves an examination of red grass fields. So that's what we got in store. And the Dornish integration, it begins with the fact that Dorne is different and needed to be integrated. Dorne, unlike any of the other kingdoms of Westeros, is covered in sand. You may have noticed that. It stands out on the map. It seems that the first men to cross over the Arm of Dorne and move into Dorne kept moving, and the few who stayed got weird. Like they turned into Fremen, basically. You know, sneaky, ruthless desert people and fierce warriors whose women will shank you as quickly as their men. Like I said, Fremen. Now, of course, we know that weirwood trees and children of the forest culture more generally shaped all of the early culture of the first men. But this may not have been the case in Dorne. This artwork of Ned Stark and Ashara Dayne at Starfall does depict a weirwood, but this art is not directed by George R.R. Martin and therefore is only speculative. And although none of us would really be shocked if there does turn out to be a weirwood at Starfall, as of right now in the books, there are no weirwoods in Dorne that we know of. House Blackmont is said to occasionally manifest vulture skin changers, so perhaps that's a remnant of First Man, Children of the Forest culture. But that's basically it. And overall, the culture of the Children of the Forest doesn't really seem to have much influence on Dorne at all. So Dorne, already pretty different than the rest of the Seven Kingdoms, and then the Rhoynar showed up about 700 years ago. And by the Rhoynar showed up, I mean a bunch of highly eligible warrior women showed up and married into the houses of the salty Dornish on the eastern coast, most notably House Martell of Sunspear. Mors Martell married Nymeria, and then they went on to conquer and unify Dorne, with Nymeria outliving Mors and eventually sending no less than 6 defeated kings to the wall in golden fetters. The Rhoynar also brought with them water wizard magic, which was very convenient in the Dornish desert. So following the unification, Dorne began to thrive as never before, with, again, a heavy Rhoynish influence. And just to give you a little context, many of you will know this, but of course George has based this Dornish-Rhoynish history somewhat on the history of the Iberian Peninsula, which has a heavy Moorish North African influence. And that's why Spain and Portugal have a little different flavor than most of the rest of Europe, which is not all the same, obviously, but, you know, Spain and Portugal are a little unique. So then about 300 years ago, Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters conquer and unify Westeros, except for Dorne. And that wasn't for a lack of trying. As we know, Aegon and his sisters waged multiple campaigns down in Dorne over the course of about a decade, where they burned all the castles repeatedly. They melted the sand into glass with dragon fire. But every time the Dornish just withdrew into their mountain caves and little desert hidey holes and just waited for the Targaryens and the dragons to pass by. See, like Trixie Fremen, I told you. Of course, that is a smarter strategy than lining up all of your armies and generals and knights in neat, orderly rows on a highly flammable grass field to face the dragons like a man. Rest in peace, House Gardner. Now, Dorne did, of course, face the dragons directly on a couple of occasions, most famously in 9 AC at the Hellholt, where they managed to, unfortunately, depending on your perspective, shoot down Meraxes with a crossbow bolt. Not a crossbow, a scorpion bolt. It's much bigger. And presumably the Dornish were drawing on the Rhoynish experience fighting the Valyrian dragons over in Essos. Before they got their asses absolutely kicked right off the continent of Essos, they did shoot down 3 dragons with scorpions. So I don't think it's a coincidence that the Dornish alone amongst all the Westerosi houses were able to shoot down a dragon. The Dornish also defied Aegon directly when Aegon took his armies into Dorne in 4 AC. They were successfully able to ambush, string out, and delay the Tyrell army when they marched on the Hellholt, which the Tyrells found empty, and as a result, many of their soldiers perished from starvation and heat exposure. Lord Orys Baratheon didn't fare much better. He got his armies surrounded and ambushed in the Boneway. They were captured by the Will of Will, which is the name for the Lord of House Will. And when Orys and his Baratheon army were eventually ransomed free a few years later, they all came back missing their right hand because the Dornish chopped them all off. So after Aegon and Rhaenys had burned enough castles, they basically declared victory and left, leaving behind some of their forces to maintain rule on their behalf. But the Dornish swiftly and successfully revolted against those lords and actually made a sport out of torturing them in cruel and creative ways, which is something the Dornish are good at. That same army that showed up at the Hellholt and found nobody home, they were under the command of Lord Harlan Tyrell, and they set out from there to conquer Vaith and Sunspear, only to have the entire army vanish into the sands without a trace. Then in 8 AC, Aegon and his sisters came back with their dragons to burn the sand some more. And that's when the Dornish began taking reprisals outside of Dorne. And here's where the Dornish reputation really begins to become terrifying. Lord Fowler of Skyreach, he burned the Marcher Lord castle Nightsong and carried off its lords and defenders as hostages. Joffrey Dane marched all the way to Old Town, setting fire to fields and villages all along the way. So that's basically like the breadbasket of the Reach. Then after Rhaenys and Meraxes fell at the Hellholt in 9 AC, Aegon put a price on the heads of all the Dornish lords. That did lead to several assassinations, but the Dornish answered in kind, coming very close to killing Aegon in the streets of King's Landing. Then we turn back to the Will of Will, the hand chopper. Well, apparently he committed atrocities against the Oakhearts at a wedding that were so atrocious that Sir Arya's Oakhart is still thinking about them 290 years later. All of which is to say, there's a lot of bad blood between the Dornish and the rest of Westeros, particularly between the Dornish and the lords of the Stormlands and the Reach who border Dorne, just on the other side of the various mountain ranges. The Dornish had gained a reputation for playing by a different set of rules, if you will, and for being ruthless and cutthroat. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken, you know the saying. So eventually, after a couple years of the dragon's wrath and more assassinations and reprisals, an uneasy truce is struck in 13 AC between Aegon and Princess Daria Martell of Dorne. For the most part, this truce held all the way up to the Dance of the Dragons in 130 AC, although there were a couple of, local Dornish rebellions against the rule of King Aenys that House Martell had absolutely nothing, no knowledge of, nothing to do with. Oh my gosh, that's so terrible. Right on Ned's lawn. Don't stop the music. So this was the situation in 157 AC when Daeron the Young Dragon took the throne and immediately set out to conquer Dorne by force. Daeron is famous for the clever strategies that he came up with to conquer Dorne, which did work, kinda, sorta. He did sort of conquered Dorne for a time, technically, although there were some caveats, as Uncle Benjen mentions to Jon Snow.
Daemon Targaryen was only 14 when he conquered Dorne, Jon said.
The young dragon was one of his heroes.
A conquest that lasted a summer, his uncle pointed out. Your boy King lost 10,000 men taking the place, and another 50 trying to hold it. Someone should have told him that war isn't a game.
He took another sip of wine.
Also, he said, wiping his mouth, Daeron Targaryen was only 18 when he died. Or have you forgotten that part?
So as you can see, it's one thing to conquer Dorne, and it's another thing to make them stay conquered. For example, after Daeron conquered and left, he left another Tyrell lord in Dorne. Those Tyrells just do not do well in Dorne. This is Lord Leo Tyrell, and this is the guy who died when he pulled on the room service chain on his canopy bed and received scorpions for room service. It's probably not what he ordered, but it's what he got, and he died. Of course, he had just spent 3 years killing thousands of Dornish and also losing thousands of lives of his own troops, again, as you heard from Uncle Benjen. So finally, Daeron reinvaded Dorne and again had military success, and just when he thought he was about to receive the final Dornish submission, he was killed under a peace banner at a parley. Daeron I Targaryen, the young dragon, he died with the sword Blackfyre in hand. 3 of his Kingsguard were cut down, and Aemon the Dragon Knight, his cousin, was captured. That's when the whole Baelor the Blessed thing happens. He walks on foot all the way to Dorne right after taking the throne. He returns many Dornish hostages of the crown. He completely forgives them for killing the king under a peace banner, basically no repercussions. And perhaps most famously, he secures the release of Aemon the Dragon Knight, his brother, by walking through the nest of snakes and not getting bitten at all, or maybe getting bitten a whole bunch of times, which may have helped make him crazy. But it's hard to tell with Baelor. He is a religious zealot. Baelor also betrothed the next eligible Targaryen prince to House Martell, who was Daeron, son of Aegon the Unworthy, who eventually becomes Daeron II, the king during the time of the Hedge Knight. That's why Daeron is married to Mariah Martell, and why his children are half Dornish, most notably Baelor, because he doesn't have the silver hair. Needless to say, these concessions to the Dornish pissed a lot of people off. Eventually, after the reign of Aegon the Unworthy, which we'll get into in the next section, Daeron II took the throne and finished the Dornish integration that Baelor had started. Daeron did this by betrothing his younger sister Daenerys to Prince Meryn Martell, who would have been Daeron's brother-in-law and, of course, the ruling prince of Dorne at that time. And as I mentioned in the Baelor video, this is the Daenerys for whom the Water Gardens were built. Around that same time, Daemon made political marriages for his children as well, and they also seem very much related to the whole Dornish integration politics. He betrothed his son Maekar to Diana of House Dane, which is of course a Dornish house, but then tried to mollify the Marcher Lords by marrying Baelor to Jenna of House Dondarrion, and Aerys to Eleanor of House Penrose. And although Houses Dondarrion and Penrose did fight for Daemon when the Blackfyre Rebellion broke out, overall this did not pacify all the anti-Dornish sentiment, which continued to fester through Daemon's reign. So now that we've got all that Dornish history fresh in our minds, let's talk about the mess that Aegon the Unworthy made and how that built upon these pre-existing tensions with Dorne. Easily the worst king to ever rule Westeros, Aegon the Unworthy was a venally corrupt, totally unscrupulous, unbridled lecher of a monarch in the style of Caligula or Donald Trump, who, by the way, is currently selling federal pardons like Funko dolls at a store in the mall. And that's when he's not covering up an international trafficking ring that victimized young girls who should have been at the mall buying Funko dolls, but instead ended up on Jeffrey Epstein's plane or island. Oh, and this just in, also when he's not starting foreign wars to cover up from the misrule and scandals at home, which is also something Aegon the Unworthy did, because there's really nothing new in politics. So like I said, unbridled lechery, Aegon the Unworthy basically used the power and prestige of the Iron Throne to sleep with as many High Lord's daughters as he possibly could. He had 9 official mistresses, and near the end of his life, claimed to have slept with as many as 900 women. And he didn't achieve that number based on his good looks or charm. It was abuse of power. And here are some of the lowlights. Aegon Unworthy traded Lord Butterwell a dragon's egg for access to all 3 of his daughters. And that's the same dragon's egg that he possesses during the story of the Mystery Knight. Aegon seemingly sold the handship to Lord Lucas Lawston in order to sleep with his wife, Felina Stokeworth, who had previously been Aegon's mistress, as well as Lord Lawston's daughter, Jane Lawston, reportedly at the same time as Felina Stokeworth, her mother, and reportedly also Jane Lawston might have been Aegon the Unworthy's child, actually, which would make Aegon the Unworthy the only Targaryen in history that we know of to commit the abomination of parent-child incest. Aegon IV stirred up the ancient enmity between House Bracken and House Blackwood. That's only the deadliest rivalry in all of Westeros. And he did this by capriciously taking the twin pair of hills known as the Teats from one house and giving them to the other based on which High Lord's daughter had caught his fancy most recently. He also took mistresses from both houses, 2 of them from House Bracken, and set them all against each other. And by the way, the village of Pennytree, from which Sir Arlen hails, is right between the Teats, which just sort of emphasizes the way that the small folk are basically invisible. Basically, they're just playthings for corrupt monarchs like Aegon the Unworthy. And here's what I mean by that. Dunk grew up in King's Landing, but in Flea Bottom, in the shadow of the Red Keep, as an invisible peasant. And Pennytree is a village so small and insignificant that Aegon the Unworthy might not have even known it existed when he was passing property from one lord to the other, based on who his latest mistress was. Perhaps worst of all, Aegon the Unworthy legitimized his noble bastards on his deathbed, including Daemon Blackfyre, but also Aegor Rivers Bittersteel, Brynden Rivers Bloodraven, and Shiera Seastar. And of course, this legitimization of Daemon Blackfyre was a big part of Daemon even being able to mount any sort of credible challenge to the throne. Up until that moment, Daeron II had been the only true-born son of Aegon the Unworthy. However, the relationship between father and son had been deteriorating for years, as we'll discuss in a moment. But first, we need to jump back in time to visit the Maiden Vault, which is something Aegon the Unworthy also may have done, visiting the Maiden Vault, not jumping back in time. Only we can do that, and maybe Bran. So the Maiden Vault was a long keep behind the royal sept that was inside the Red Keep. And famously, this was the place where Baelor the Blessed locked his hot sisters away, kind of like a giant chastity belt that you can lock women inside of. Baelor the Blessed, of course, had originally been married to one of his sisters, Dana, later known as Dana the Defiant. But not long after becoming king, Baelor grew too pious to even sleep with his sister. Can't even sleep with his own sister wife. Or maybe he was just scared of his penis. He thought it was a dragon. And dragons are satanic, so yeah. Point being, Baelor had the marriage dissolved and then locked all of his sisters in the Maiden Vault. It was this Dana who, in 170 AC, at the age of 25, gave birth to Daemon Blackfyre, though she kept the identity of the father's secret for some time. The father was Aegon the Unworthy, in case you didn't pick that up. And Aegon would have been 35 at this time, and he had already been married to his sister, Nerys, for some 17 years, and with their son Daeron having been born 16 years earlier. Aegon the Unworthy was still 2 steps away from becoming king, but those steps came quickly. Baelor, you see, was so mortified at the sin of his ex-sister wife having given birth to a mysterious bastard that he began a 40-day fast that ended with his death by starvation on the 41st day. Since Baelor had no sons, the throne passed to his uncle, Viserys II, who was actually the second child of Daemon and Rhaenyra, and also the father of Aegon the Unworthy. Viserys II was 48 when he took the throne, and it's now 171 AC. And wouldn't you know it, less than 2 years into his reign, he died suddenly of a mysterious illness. And in case you're wondering, yes, many people at the time and since have suspected Aegon the Unworthy with poisoning his father, Viserys II, to take the throne that he coveted so much. Although again, he coveted the throne as a way to gain access to highborn women, and not as a way to bring peace and prosperity to the Seven Kingdoms. Aegon's reign of corruption and chaos lasted 12 years, from 172 AC to 184 AC. And there are several things we need to add to the list of lowlights that we already discussed. So first of all, it was Aegon's son Daeron who became the primary opposition to his misrule. This is probably where he got the name Daeron the Good, I would think, with Daeron being 18 when his father took the throne and 30 when his father finally died and passed him the throne. The second thing is that Daemon started getting attention at the age of 12 when he won a squire's tourney and was knighted by his father, who also gave him the Targaryen ancestral sword Blackfyre, which had been passed down from king to king since the time of Aegon the Conqueror. So that's kind of a big deal. And people even started saying that Daemon Blackfyre resembled Aegon the Conqueror, or maybe Henry Cavill. It's hard to say. This is actually when Daemon changed his last name from Waters to Blackfyre. So you can see that even before he's legitimized, he's already chafing against the label of bastard and seeking to rise above. With the point being that Daemon was shaping up to be a great warrior, the warrior himself, as Sir Eustace says, with the classic Targaryen looks of purple eyes and silver hair. Daeron, on the other hand, was one of those bookish Targaryens, one of the bookish ones, and that's presumably why he was never given the sword Blackfyre. Or maybe it was because he had the temerity to oppose the corruption of his father. So this is all happening in 182 or 183 AC, meaning right near the end of King Aegon the Unworthy's life. So Daemon being given the sword Blackfyre was definitely seen as a sign of the king's shifting favor from Daeron to Daemon. When Aegon followed this up by legitimizing Daemon and the other great bastards on his deathbed less than 2 years later, many people began to see Daemon as the rightful king. And by many people, I mean all the houses who gained power due to Aegon the Unworthy's corruption, and who swiftly lost power when Daeron became king and cleaned house, which he did almost immediately. Then there were all those houses in the Stormlands and the Reach who had resented Dorne going all the way back to Baelor the Blessed's concessions and all the other violence that we discussed in the last section. And those lords certainly resented Dorne's new rise to power. Because remember, King Daeron is ascending the throne with a Martell queen, Mariah Martell, and with a half-Dornish heir to the Iron Throne, Baelor Breakspear. So there's a real changing of the guard here from Aegon the Unworthy to Daeron. All those corrupt old lords are pushed out, and all of a sudden there's Dornish people at court and stuff. And then on top of all of that, Aegon the Unworthy also undermined Daeron's future rule while he was still alive by spreading the rumor that he himself had not fathered Daeron, but that rather his younger brother Aemon the Dragon Knight had conceived Daeron with Nerys. This is why Sir Eustace Osgrey calls Daeron the Falseborn. And we really have no way of knowing the truth. You almost hope that he was the son of Aemon the Dragon Knight and Nerys, but this may have been a political rumor because Aemon and Nerys formed a kind of political bloc with Daeron, opposing the misrule of Aegon the Unworthy. This tension between father and son really comes to a head when Aegon the Unworthy attempts not one, but 2 botched invasions of Dorne. So he's no young dragon, apparently, and this was near the end of his reign, and some people think the entire purpose of this was to undermine Daeron's power so as to enable a supplanting of Daeron with Daemon Blackfyre as heir. The thinking goes that the Dornish would have fought for Daeron's rights if he had been passed over, and so perhaps Aegon invaded preemptively so that he could make the switch to Daemon Blackfyre. Whatever the case, both invasions, again, failed miserably. The fleet he built to invade, in emulation of the tactics of the young dragon, was destroyed by storms in the Narrow Sea. And the wooden wildfire dragons that he cooked up, that was totally his own thing, They burned down, fell over, and they didn't sink into the swamp. They burned down a quarter of the Kingswood. So these are some sort of wooden war engine things with wildfire. They didn't get anywhere near Dorne. They caught fire right on the other side of the Blackwater Rush. So invasion rejected. So as you can see, Daemon had a lot to deal with when he took the throne in 184. And we are told that he tried to keep his newly legitimized royal siblings happy by continuing their incomes and lands and titles and all that stuff. Interestingly, the Blackfyre Rebellion doesn't break out until a full 12 years into Daemon's reign in 196 AC. And during those 12 years, the already existing tensions basically build up to a crescendo, with a major event being the final integration of Dorne into the kingdom in 187 AC, 3 years into Daemon's rule. As we mentioned a moment ago, this was accomplished by King Daemon wedding his younger sister Daenerys to Meryn Martell, which gave Daemon Blackfyre, now age 17, sour grapes for 2 reasons. One, he is said to have coveted Daenerys for himself, and Daenerys is actually right around the same age as Daemon Blackfyre and Baelor Breakspear. And 2, speaking of Baelor Breakspear, the Dornish-looking son of King Daemon, he defeated Daemon Blackfyre at a joust at the wedding for Daenerys and Meryn Martell. So it was kind of a double whammy for Daemon. He lost the woman he loved, and he lost the joust to what is becoming a bitter rival. So there are basically 4 great bastards that we need to keep track of, right? Daemon Blackfyre and Bitter Steel on one hand, and on the other, Brynden Rivers, aka Bloodraven, and Shiera Seastar. That's right, Shiera Seastar. We've talked about Daemon already, so let's focus on Bloodraven and Bitter Steel and their bitter feud, which in part was over Shiera Seastar. So Aegor Rivers, aka Bitter Steel, was born in 172 AC, just 2 years after Daemon Blackfyre and Baelor Breakspear. Aegor's mother was Barbara Bracken, who was Aegon the Unworthy's 5th mistress. 172 was also the year that Aegon the Unworthy took the throne, so he's already on mistress number 5, plus being married by the time he becomes king. And when he took the throne and made Barbara his mistress openly, he also named Barbara's father, Lord Bracken, to the office of Hand of the King, because why would you want to, make the most competent person Hand of the King when you could just sell the office? It's not like it's an important job or anything. Anyway, you get the idea. So Aegor was born later that year, again, 172, and just 2 weeks after Aegor's birth, Queen Nerys almost died in childbirth. And while she was on the brink of death, Lord Bracken began to speak openly that maybe Aegon the Unworthy should just go ahead and marry Barbara Bracken. But then Nerys recovered, and this was a great dishonor, and so Aemon the Dragon Knight, Nerys, and Daeron were able to sort of force Aegon the Unworthy to send the Brackens away from court. So that's Lord Bracken, Barbara, and baby Aegor. All of them were sent back to Stonehenge, the home castle of the Brackens. Aegon's next move was to take a mistress from House Bracken's bitter rival, of course, House Blackwood. And this was Melissa Blackwood, aka Missy, who gave birth to Bloodraven in 175 AC. The real trouble came as the Brackens then groomed Barbara's younger sister, Bethany, to seduce King Aegon and get the Brackens back in his good graces, which worked, predictably. And this seduction, so to speak, went down at Stonehenge in 177 AC when King Aegon the Unworthy was paying his son Aegor a visit. Unfortunately, not long after this, Bethany Bracken was caught abed with Sir Miles Toyne of the Kingsguard, who would go on to form the Kingswood Brotherhood. And when Aegon caught them, he executed Bethany and her father. Cheating's only okay when Aegon does it. If someone else does it, it's the death penalty. And then just to keep you updated on the Ballad of the Teats, as it were, they were originally called the Mother's Teats. And originally they belonged to House Bracken. So when Aegon took the busty Barbara Bracken as his mistress in 172, he renamed the Teats Barbara's Teats. But then after the Brackens fell out of favor and Aegon took Missy Blackwood for his mistress, the, again, busty Barbara Bracken was overheard mocking Melissa for being as flat as a boy. And then Aegon, I guess to make Missy Blackwood feel better, took the Teats from House Bracken, gave them to House Blackwood, and renamed them Missy's Teats. And so now each house calls them by a different name. All of which is to say, Aegor Rivers grew up bitter and angry, hence the name. And he directed these emotions primarily at Bloodraven, House Blackwood, and King Daemon. Then as Bloodraven and Bitter Steel hit adulthood, their rivalry gained real steam because both of them, again, pursued Shiera Seastar, last royal bastard of King Aegon the Unworthy and confirmed heterochromia hottie. Shiera seemingly chose Bloodraven over Bittersteel, and although she always refused Bloodraven's marriage proposals, they did become lovers and companions, and it is rumored and strongly suggested that Shiera helped Bloodraven with sorcery once Bloodraven became Daeron's Hand of the King. Sir Barristan the Bold recalls this history in A Dance with Dragons, thinking to himself that Bittersteel and Bloodraven both loved Shiera Seastar, and the Seven Kingdoms bled. Bittersteel is known to have frequently encouraged Daemon to claim the throne for years. And then once war broke out, Bittersteel, along with Fireball, became one of Daemon Blackfyre's top generals. That's why many people kind of blame Bittersteel for being a major cause of the war, although I do think it's important to point out just how thoroughly Aegon the Unworthy set the table for all of this. The other man who is seen as chiefly responsible for convincing Daemon to rebel is Quentyn Ball, also known as Fireball for his fiery red hair and, you guessed it, fiery hot temper. And of course, we are big fans of the Comet sigil that Fireball took. Sir Quentyn had been the master-at-arms at the Red Keep for a long time. He basically trained all of the Targaryens who fought at Redgrass Field. Daemon Blackfyre, Bittersteel, Bloodraven, Baelor Breakspear, and his brother Maekar, all of them learned to fight from Fireball. So why was this Quentyn Ball guy so keen to start a rebellion? Well, Aegon the Unworthy strikes again, and also we do have to put some of the blame on Daeron here. Aegon the Unworthy had at one point promised Quentyn Ball the next white cloak that came available. And Fireball had actually gone so far as to put aside his wife. He sent her to the Silent Sisters in preparation of becoming a Kingsguard. But then Aegon the Unworthy died, Daeron became king instead, and when a spot in the Kingsguard came open, Daeron chose to give the white cloak to Sir William Wilde instead of Fireball. For whatever reason, we're really not sure why. But we are sure that it pissed off Fireball something proper. And so that is why he helped Daemon Blackfyre start a rebellion. No word on how the wife felt about being sent to the Silent Sisters, but I'm sure that probably sucked. So now it's 196 AC, we're ready to start the rebellion proper, and the way that it goes down is truly incredible. Alright, it's time to raise the banner of the Black Dragon, at least if you're a filthy rebel traitor. Shout out Greyways Tim. And so here is how the rebellion started. Basically, Bloodraven went Johnny Mnemonic, meaning that he predicted a crime that hadn't happened yet with preternatural ability, and then moved to arrest the perpetrator before they could perpetrate. In this case, the future criminal, if you will, was Daemon Blackfyre, and the thought crime was, of course, rebellion. The World of Ice and Fire, which is basically the masterly account of history, does have to make us chuckle a bit, knowing what we do now about Sir Brynden Rivers. So the Maesters tell us that basically as soon as Daemon Blackfyre had decided to go ahead and make a claim for the throne, word soon reached King Daeron that Blackfyre meant to declare himself within the turn of the moon. We do not know how word came to Daeron, though Marion's unfinished The Red Dragon and the Black suggests that another of the great bastards, Brynden Rivers, was involved. Well, I'd say so. Probably, yeah. Probably Bloodraven was involved with that. We can probably chalk this one up to Weirwood Total Information Awareness Network. The account continues. The king sent the Kingsguard to arrest Daemon before he could take his plans for treason any further. Daemon was forewarned, and with the help of the famously hot-tempered knight Sir Quentyn Ball, called Fireball, he was able to escape the Red Keep safely. Daemon Blackfyre's allies used this attempted arrest as a cause for war, claiming that Daeron had acted against Daemon out of no more than baseless fear. Alright, so this is where things get really interesting. We do have every reason to believe that Bloodraven is using Skin Changer or Greenseer magic to spy on people. Whether he's just using the birds and the mice and things to eavesdrop, or actually using full Greenseer magic to basically perform a remote viewing. And that means that Daemon probably was planning on rebelling and would have done so anyway, even if Daeron hadn't tried to arrest him. But because Daeron did try to arrest him and failed, Daemon and his supporters did now have a legitimate pretext for going to war, much as Robert and Ned and Jon Arryn went to war when Aerys demanded that Jon Arryn render up Ned and Robert to Aerys for likely execution, being burned alive like Uncle Rickard, etc. And then as to the question of how was Daemon forewarned, well, if I had to guess, I would point at at Fireball and say that someone who's been master at arms at the Red Keep for like 2 decades probably has a lot of friends with the soldiers and the gold cloaks. It only takes one leaker to spread the word, and so that would be my guess. But let me know what you think in the comments. So it's kind of Schrodinger's rebellion. Hard to say who started it, and this is of course a clever writing decision by George Martin, one which is meant to mimic real history, because so often those crucial events that set off a war get spun by both sides and sort of disappear into this fog of history, with later historians being left to ponder who shot first, as it were. And so just as George Lucas cleverly created 2 versions of Star Wars, one where Han shot first and one where he didn't, George has essentially designed Daemon's arrest for insurrection so that either side can claim that the other started the war. And obviously I'm kidding about Star Wars. George Lucas seems to have changed that to make Han nicer and not to create a fog of history. So the attempted arrest goes sideways. Fireball whisks away Daemon, and it is then that Daemon reverses the Targaryen coat of arms from a red dragon on black to a black dragon on red. And just as a quick aside, I've always kind of wondered why Aegon the Conqueror took a red dragon on black as his sigil when he rode a black dragon and they had no red dragons in House Targaryen at that time. I'm really stumped on that one. I don't have an answer. If you got an idea, let me know in the comments. It's probably just because George Martin thought it looked cooler, but I don't know. Maybe there's a different answer. Oh, and then one other note on Bittersteel. Daemon Blackfyre agreed to wed his daughter, Calla Blackfyre, to Bittersteel, although we are never told if that marriage was consummated. It very likely was, and this is probably the female line of Blackfyre which Illyrio descends from and refers to. And this is, of course, the Fagon Blackfyre theory. Don't have time to get into that now, but Illyrio has that famous line, the Blackfyre line died out except for in the female line. So that's probably Calla and Aegor. In any case, the World of Ice and Fire tells us that subsequently many battles were fought between the Black and Red Dragons in the Vale, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, and elsewhere, which is history that I'm sure George will have fun expanding on when he sits down to write Blood and Fire, the sequel to Fire and Blood that will pick up in the timeline where the first book left off, which was basically right after the Dance of the Dragons. We do know a couple of things about these pre-Redgrass Field battles, though, chiefly where it concerns Fireball, who led a force into the Westerlands and killed the lords of House Lannister and House Lefford at the gates of Lannisport. Then Fireball turned south and east and defeated a loyalist force at a crossing of the Mander River, although we're not told exactly where. And at this battle, apparently, Fireball slew all of Lady Penrose's sons, save for the youngest, whom he spared out of mercy. And you'll remember that Daeron's son Aerys is married to Aelinor Penrose. But then, as Sir Eustace mentioned at the top in his little diatribe, Sir Quentyn was slain on the eve of the Battle of Redgrass Field. Apparently, he was having a drink from a stream and was shot by some rando archer whom I'm sure was not Bloodraven or one of Bloodraven's ravens. It probably was. And so yeah, that would have been a big blow to the Blackfyre cause. I mean, Fireball was kicking ass all over the Westerlands and the Reach and then lost right before Redgrass Field. So that brings us to the Battle of Redgrass Field. And oddly, we aren't totally certain where it is. So although we don't know for sure, we can make a pretty good educated guess as to where Redgrass Field is located. George has indicated that it's near King's Landing, and we know from the account of Bloodraven taking the ridge that we're looking for a place that has some hills or ridge of some kind. That means it's probably in this region to the south and west of King's Landing where the foothills at the headwaters of the Mander begin to rise. I mean, we know the battle wasn't in the Kingswood Forest, and it's not taking place on the Blackwater Bay, so it's basically down to either north of the city where there are no foothills drawn on the map, or southwest in the direction of the headwaters of the Mander. And then of course you'll remember Quentyn Ball was just fighting a battle somewhere at a crossing of the Mander. So it seems like he's bringing the rebel forces up the Mander towards King's Landing. And that's why Sir Eustace says, oh, if things had gone different, Daemon would have been sitting on the Iron Throne before Baelor Breakspear even got there with his Dornish cavalry. So yeah, they're very close to the city and almost certainly somewhere just to the southwest here. As for the battle itself, all of our specific granular information comes from Daemon Blackfyre superfan Sir Eustace Osgrey. Who else? So I will go ahead and let him tell the story in George's prose instead of summarizing it myself. And before we begin, I want to just remind you of that John Connington quote real quick, where he said, "Others might claim that the realm was lost when Prince Rhaegar fell to Robert's warhammer on the Trident, but the Battle of the Trident would never have been fought if the Griffin had only slain the stag there in Stony Sept." Sir Eustace will basically be saying the same thing about the hammer and anvil pincher movement versus the importance of Bloodraven.
"A great battle is a terrible thing," the old knight said, "but in the midst of blood and carnage there is sometimes also beauty. Beauty that could break your heart. I will never forget the way the sun looked when it set upon the red grass field. 10,000 men had died, and the air was thick with moans and lamentations. But above us, the sky turned gold and red and orange, so beautiful it made me weep to know that my sons would never see it. It was a closer thing than they would have you believe these days, if not for Bloodraven."
"I'd always heard it was Baelor Breakspear who won the battle," said Dunk. "Him and Prince Maekar."
"The hammer and the anvil?"
The old man's mustache gave a twitch.
"The singers leave out much and more. Daemon was the warrior himself that day. No man could stand before him. He broke Lord Arryn's van to pieces and slew the Knight of Nine Stars and Wild Will Waynwood before coming upon Sir Gawain Corbray of the Kingsguard. For near an hour they danced together on their horses, wheeling and circling and slashing as men died all around them. It's said that whenever Blackfyre and Lady Forlorn clashed, you could hear the sound for a league around. It was half a song and half a scream, they say. But when at last the lady faltered, Blackfyre clove through Sir Gawain's helm and left him blind and bleeding. Sir Daemon dismounted to see that his fallen foe was not trampled, and commanded Red Tusk to carry him back to the maesters in the rear. And there was his mortal error, for the Raven's Teeth had gained the top of Weeping Ridge, and Bloodraven saw his half-brother's royal standard 300 yards away, and Daemon and his sons beneath it. He slew Aegon first, the elder of the twins, for he knew that Daemon would never leave the boy whilst warmth lingered in his body. The white shafts fell like rain, nor did he, though 7 arrows pierced him, driven as much by sorcery as by Bloodraven's bow. Young Aemon took up Blackfyre when the blade slipped from his dying father's fingers, so Bloodraven slew him too, the younger of the twins. Thus perished the Black Dragon and his sons. There was much and more afterward, I know. I saw a bit of it myself. The rebels running, Bittersteel turning the rout and leading his mad charge. His battle with Bloodraven, second only to the one Daemon fought with Gawain Corbray. Prince Baelor's hammer blow against the rebel rear, the Dornishmen all screaming as they filled the air with spears. But at the end of the day, it made no matter. The war was done when Daemon died. So close a thing. If Daemon had ridden over Gawain Corbray and left him to his fate, he might have broken Maekar's left before Bloodraven could take the ridge. The day would have belonged to the Black Dragons then, with the hands slain and the road to King's Landing open before them. Daemon might have been sitting on the Iron Throne by the time Prince Baelor could come up with his Storm Lords and his Dornishmen. The singers can go on about their hammer and their anvil, sir, but it was the Kinslayer who turned the tide with a white arrow and a black spell. He rules us now as well, make no mistake. The king is his creature. It would not surprise me to learn that Bloodraven had ensorcelled his grace to bend him to his will. Small wonder we are cursed.
Sir Eustace shook his head and lapsed into a brooding silence. Dunk wondered how much Egg had overheard, but there was no way to ask him. How many eyes does Lord Bloodraven have, he thought. And so there you have it. That is the story of the Battle of Redgrass Field. And I do have to say that Eustace is probably correct that the war was over when Daemon died. Although we do know the various rebel houses had other motivations apart from just setting Daemon Blackfyre on the throne. However, Daemon's cause was really the only legitimate pretext that they had for rebelling against King Daeron. Without Daemon Blackfyre, or either of his eldest sons who were slain on the battlefield along with him, there simply was no longer an alternate candidate to the throne to rally around. So the pincher movement of Maekar and Baelor, the hammer and the anvil, it definitely did clean things up. However, if this were a sporting event and we were handing out the MVP of the game award, it would definitely have to go to Bloodraven for slaying Daemon Blackfyre and both of his sons with weirwood arrows, and maybe also Sir Quentin Ball. Now, it could be true that Sir Eustace is overemphasizing the importance of Bloodraven. After all, he's assuming that Bloodraven was using magic spells to guide the arrows, but also says that the arrows were falling like rain, so maybe they were just a lot of them. But since we know that Bloodraven is a green seer and a sorcerer, that probably is the answer. The idea that weirwood arrows could be guided by voices, meaning spells, does make a lot of sense, and probably has other support elsewhere in the novels. And chiefly I'm talking about one of Bran's green seer visions after he eats the weirwood paste in Bloodraven's cave and sees a series of visions out of the eyes of Winterfell's heart tree, because one of them goes like this: a dark-eyed youth, pale and fierce, sliced 3 branches off the weirwood and shaped them into arrows. This is thought by most people to be Brandon Snow, the bastard half-brother of Torrhen Stark, who was called the King Who Knelt because he decided to kneel to Aegon and his sisters instead of trying to fight dragons with not dragons. Reportedly, Brandon Snow had a secret plan to sneak across the River Trident and slay all 3 dragons with those weirwood arrows. But instead, we're told that Torrhen sent his brother across to parley and not to kill dragons. The only conceivable way that Brandon would have thought that he could slay all 3 dragons is, obviously, if he had the ability to guide those weirwood arrows with magic. If you knew that you could send them all right into the eye sockets, that's really the best way to kill a dragon. And I suppose it's also possible that weirwood arrows have some sort of inherent magical quality that kills dragons, kind of like a chunk of black obsidian will pop and melt the White Walkers, but that's a lot more speculative. And I think the safe conclusion here is that weirwood arrows can be guided a little bit through magic. And you can certainly picture the Children of the Forest using this sort of technique against the First Men in their wars thousands of years ago. Someone in the comments of my last live stream actually suggested that maybe because green seers can see all the different futures, they would know just when to release the arrow. So it's kind of a multiverse thing. But the bottom line is that if you're asking me, yes, Bloodraven can aim the weirwood arrows, and that's why he was so effective at killing so many people in the exact order that he wanted to. I mean, why make the arrows out of weirwood otherwise, right? It's because weirwood is a magic tree. And then just addressing a few of the loose details from Sir Eustace's laundry list of if, ands, and buts. We don't know when or where this fellow Quickfinger got caught stealing the dragon's eggs, or why that would have potentially turned the tide of the war. Like, did Sir Eustace think that Daemon could hatch the dragon's eggs, either to use the dragons in war or just as a powerful symbol to make more houses rally to him? The only other thing I can think of is that maybe Quickfinger trying to steal the eggs was something that happened right as Daemon decided he was about to rebel, and that him being caught is what tipped Bloodraven off to try to arrest Daemon, but Daemon wasn't arrested. So I still don't see how that would have tipped the balance. And I also think that Bloodraven probably was using sorcery to know that Daemon was about to rebel. So again, I'll say let me know in the comments if you've got an idea about Quickfinger and the dragon's eggs and why that could have changed anything. And then Sir Eustace mentions a Lord Bracken, obviously not the same one that Aegon executed, probably his son, having traveled across the sea to fetch those oh-so-accurate Mirish crossbowmen, but that they were unfortunately delayed by storms and didn't arrive in time. That kind of implies that Daemon was not able to wait longer to fight this battle, probably because the armies were converging on King's Landing and he just had to fight with the army that he had. And overall, this is pretty easy to understand. There were some more soldiers coming. They didn't get there in time. If they had, that might have helped. And similarly, it's pretty easy to understand that several houses tried to play both sides, and if they hadn't, if they had committed all their forces to the Blackfyre Rebellion, perhaps that would have helped as well. And on top of that, Eustace mentions Sir Manfred Lawston, who switched sides. And since House Lawston is in charge of Harrenhal at this time, it's likely that Daemon and Fireball and Bittersteel were expecting an army to come down from Harrenhal and join their forces outside of King's Landing. But instead, the opposite happened. Obviously, the Lawstons joined Daeron's side, and this apparently made some amount of difference. Now, we'd all love to know more about the duel between Bittersteel and Bloodraven, and how Bloodraven managed to get his eye put out without gaining some sort of huge facial scar. I'd guess that's some sort of eye slit in the helm type thing, but yeah, we're just told it was a famous duel. We don't know how it went. Bloodraven does have Dark Sister at his disposal. And again, I'm sure George will have fun fleshing out this history. And yes, that's a Bloodraven lost his eye fleshing out joke whenever he gets around to writing Blood and Fire, or when the Blackfyre Rebellion is made into an HBO production in like the year 2032, when HBO will, of course, be owned by AOL, Time Warner, Netflix, Microsoft, YouTube, Amazon, a subsidiary of Palantir BlackRock USA Corp. Until then, that's pretty much everything we know about the Blackfyre Rebellion, from its inception to the events that precipitated it to the war itself. So if you enjoyed this video, please do leave a comment below, and don't forget the Man to Sleep link and promo code if you're interested in a sleep mask. And the last thing I want to tell you before you get out of here, we will be doing a live post-game show after every Night of the Seven Kingdoms episode. And we just found out today that George is planning on giving something I've been urging George to do, not that he's listening to my channel, but yeah, a lot of people have been saying, hey George, you might not have time to write 10 or 12 more Dunk and Egg novellas, which he has planned, so why don't you give the outlines to the show to do? He's going to do that. He's going to give supposedly as many as 10 Dunk and Egg story outlines to the show so they can keep doing a new story every season for potentially the next decade. So that's awesome. And yeah, there you go. Blackfyre Rebellion. Thanks for watching, guys. See you on Sunday. So long from Planky Town. Take me down to Planky Town.